Sarah Palin this week accepted the nomination to run with John McCain on the Republican ticket, but there are some who have serious questions about her background as Alaska's governor. Palin is accused of sacking a state official who refused to fire her brother-in-law and using controversial means to check into the family member's email and personal files. And the ethics questions don't stop in the executive branch. Ways and Means Chairman Charlie Rangel helps write tax laws in the United States. But there's news out today that he owes taxes on at least $75,000 in rental property income. And that's in addition to recent questions about his real estate holdings in New York. For more on ethics issues surrounding elected officials, we're joined by Melanie Sloan, Executive Director of Citizens for Responsibility and Ethics in Washington. She joins me now in our studio. Melanie, thanks for your time. Let's start with Sarah Palin and some of these ethics concerns people have had. Is this just simply politics that go along with being a candidate in this race, or do you think there's something deeper here?
I think there's something much deeper. You have to remember this ethics inquiry into Sarah Palin started long before she was named as John McCain's running mate. So this has been ongoing in the state of Alaska. There are real questions about whether Sarah Palin improperly used her authority to fire the Public Services Commissioner, Walter Monaghan, because he wouldn't fire her brother-in-law, former brother-in-law, State Trooper Michael Wooten. The investigation's been ongoing, and while Sarah Palin has pledged her public cooperation, in private, behind the scenes, she's been doing everything she can to undermine the investigation. For example, before the investigator hired by the state legislature could start, she had her own attorney general start running a parallel investigation, even though that attorney general had himself contacted Mr. Monaghan.
Well, this is all very suspicious. It doesn't sound very good. Is it enough to really imperil her vice presidential bid and then, by default, the presidential bid of John McCain?
Well, that's hard to say. Mr. McCain put her on the ticket in large part because of her reputation as a reformer and as somebody who was opposed to corruption and had such a good record. If she is found to have engaged in unethical conduct herself and that investigation is to be concluded before the election, that could really hurt her on the ticket.
Anything else about Sarah Palin you think is important for people to know about? I mean, it feels like we kind of know everything we need to know at this point. You think more stuff will come out related to these ethics investigations?
I think so. I think that as deposition testimony is taken, more and more will come out. Ms. Palin has denied firing Mr. Monaghan for improper reasons, and I think we'll learn more and more about what her staff did to pressure him.
All right, let's talk about another public figure facing accusations of potentially ethics wrongdoing here. Congressman Charlie Rangel, very powerful chairman of the House Ways and Means Committee, which writes the federal tax code. He is potentially under fire today for earning some $75,000 in rental income off a house that he owns in the Dominican Republic, but not reporting it on federal tax returns. How much of an issue should this be, or would this be, for the tax writer that he is?
I think it is going to be an issue for Mr. Rangel. Mr. Rangel not only didn't report it on his tax returns, but he didn't report it on his financial disclosure forms. These are the forms that every member of Congress has to file once a year, and one of the things that needs to be included is all rental property income. Mr. Rangel included it some years, didn't include it others, so there's clearly violations of both House rules and potentially federal law for not including that information on those forms.
Well, he says that he will always consider this property an investment property, not a vacation home, which then gives him certain exemptions. Are you buying this, or you think it's an excuse, a cover-up?
Well, that may certainly give him some exemptions with regard to the tax returns, but it doesn't as regard to the financial disclosure forms. Whatever it was, however he was getting the income, the investment property had to be listed on the financial disclosure forms, and the House Ethics Committee is going to be demanding answers there.
And what does it say that he is this top, the top guy on this committee that really does write the federal tax code, and that this guy's embroiled in this sort of thing?
Well, it doesn't look good when Mr. Rangel isn't that clear on his own finances and he's in charge of tax writing legislation. I believe that there have been some Republican calls for him to step down as chairman, and I'm sure those will only increase as the days go on. I think right now we don't have quite enough information on exactly the state of Mr. Rangel's holdings in the Dominican Republic, and I think as we learn more, we'll have better answers there.
All right, let me ask you about the state of ethics violations in Washington and among public officials in general. We've had a lot of tightening of ethics rules since the Jack Abramoff scandal hit last year and in 2006, particularly with regard to how, for example, ethics are handled at conventions, which just wrapped up. finger foods are only allowed, not actual meals eaten with a knife and fork, for example. You can't have a party honoring a particular lawmaker. It's got to be a delegation. Have things gone a little bit too far, in your opinion, or are things working because of these new tighter rules?
Well, I think some of the tighter rules have a good impact. We don't want our members wined and dined at conventions by lobbyists and top corporations, getting more of an influence with them than regular people have. But by the same token, that's not really where most of the problems are. And a lot of the wining and dining has just been shifted, frankly, over to the campaign world. You can not take a member out to dinner, but you can if it's a campaign event. So some of that is still ongoing.
All right, Melanie Sloan, thank you so much for your time. We appreciate it.